and welcome to Blah. I was going for something big and booming and portentous because this is a big and booming and portentous episode, but man, I fucked it up. Hello and welcome to Blah Blah Comics, Blah Blah Curse Words. Keep every single word of that in. I'm Derek.
I will, and I am Colby.
And we talk comics sometimes, and holy shit, you guys and girls and non-binary specific people, we're doing another one. We promised we would. We've been talking about it for a long time. One of the biggest and most popular features that we do on Blah Blah, which is traditionally a comics and pop culture podcast brought to you by the Night Nerd Network, is that sometimes we'll do deep dives on creators and honestly kind of pit them against each other. We've had some really tremendous fun talking about Frank Miller versus Alan Moore versus Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore versus Grant Morrison, Matt Fraction versus Jonathan Hickman,
Neil Gaiman versus Grant. Yeah, we've had a lot of crossover. Yeah, we started off with a crossover. Yeah, we started off with a kind of tournament format. So Grant Morrison, Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, of course, kept popping up. For better or worse.
That Frank Miller Alan Moore episode was really fascinating to me because that was a nail biter in a way I did not expect it to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, and they're kind of beloved episodes. We love doing them. People seem to love listening to them, and we haven't done one in a while. We kind of figured we closed out season 1 with the patron saint of Blah Blah Comics, Blah Blah Curse Words, Grant Morrison versus quite possibly the biggest comic writer of all time, Alan Moore. Unsurprisingly, Grant Morrison ended up winning that one out, but again, much closer than I think either of us expected it to be. But this time, to start season 2 of the Comics Collision, I don't know if I've actually announced what it's called, the Comics Collision, we have decided to do something we've never done before. We are pitting artist versus artist, 2 artists that both Colby and I have tremendous affection and fondness for, 2 artists with an incredible resume. We are looking at Frank Quitely. I always say quietly, but it's supposed to be Frank Quitely because it's a pseudonym for Quite Frankly. And you kind of flip the words around. Versus Colby.
Versus Greg Capullo.
Yes. Again, we are big, tremendous fans of their work. We talked about how much we adore Last Night on Earth on our previous podcast. Colby and I have been Frank Quitely fans for years, going back to New X-Men and Invisibles and We Three, and of course the seminal Superman text, All-Star Superman. Colby, what are you thinking about these 2 fighters?
It's an interesting one because at first I was kind of not totally for it, but the more you think about their careers, who they are as artists and individuals, the closer a fight it becomes, where it does become they both have had definitive character designs, definitive runs with some of the best writers of all time. They're both known for being a key part of major teams in comics. They're both known for revitalizing franchises and adding a new spin on it. So it's a very interesting, and both have been active, especially since about 92 forward. Both have been extremely active in American and British comics and worldwide comics in general.
All true, exactly. I think that's a really, really intelligent rundown of both creators. Honestly, the biggest thing for me for choosing, when we were talking about choosing these 2 fighters, again, I want to stress, you and I are both big fans of both of these creators. So neither one of us has like a favored dog in this fight. I mean, I think you might lean a little towards Capullo, gun to your head. I probably lean a little more towards Quietly, gun to my head. Yeah. But unlike something like the James O'Barr versus Johnny Vasquez fight, which was very nearly a fight, not a not a collision. Neither one of these creators have like such a hold on our heartstrings that we're going to go to the mat and spill blood over this. We love both of their work. We really do want to compare both of these creators' overall genres and see if we can even figure out who we think should come out on top.
Yeah, I think this is honestly the closest we've had to a dream match, if you will, for collisions. As far as this is, like I said, I don't really have a favorite in these 2. They are 2. If you had to ask us who are probably the best representatives of the comics we love and artists that we love in comics, they are very quite possibly point 1 and point 2 on that list. they are definitely will always be in the top 5. Like every year we talk about comics, if they have work, their work is always in our favorite art pretty much, or at least an honorable mention. They're two people also. I hesitate to say it, but I think it's true. I don't think they've ever truly just like had a comic where they just completely phoned it in, or they're just like, oh, this is not great work. Like for both of them, the worst you can say is, oh, that's just okay. That's just a good version of their work, which a good version of their work is still miles above so many others.
Head and shoulders above so many others. Yeah, something we we mentioned on the Last Night on Earth review was, looking back on it, I feel like Metal was not necessarily Capullo's strongest work, and it's still a fucking gorgeous book.
Yeah, I mean, compared to even like recent Quietly stuff with Jupiter's Legacy or something, you could say something similar where it may not be.
I was going to say, I feel the same way about Jupiter's Legacy. Jupiter's Legacy is the closest thing you're going to get to a Frank Quietly putting in the work for a paycheck, and it's still fucking balls awesome.
Yeah.
100% agreed.
Well, I think we just dive into this because we've got some big stuff to tackle here.
Absolutely, and I'm really interested because I feel like the first one or two questions are a little bit of a gimme, so let's go ahead and get those knocked out so we can get to the real meat of this discussion.
So we're going to try to keep these kind of more formatted than we did for the art. The artists, a lot of times we tailored for them. I'm going to try to keep this around the same list for artists so we can kind of keep it a more fair and balanced fight through most of this, because I think when writers, you're talking about so many other things, but especially with these artists, I think I wanted to boil it down to what makes them them and what makes so many artists, in my opinion, great in the long-term format of comics. So our first question is going to be, who is the better long-term storyteller when it comes to comics? Who's had the best ongoing long series, basically? And I was thinking at first it's kind of an obvious answer, but at the same time, so in my head it's basically Capullo's run on clearly Batman and Spawn, but you also have Quietly on New X-Men.
Yeah, but even Quietly on New X-Men, it felt very sporadic, and I am someone who adores the New X-Men run. I have every single issue in singles. I have the omnibus sitting here on my shelf. It's a book I've gone back to several times, and it's a book that Igor Korgi, as interesting as an artist as he is, occasionally had to turn in some books like within a week because Quietly missed his deadline or because Quietly wasn't available. I keep saying Quietly. Now, admittedly, Quietly continued to contribute covers on New X-Men, but his interior pencils, it was a real, it got to the point where it was almost a real joy and surprise to see a Quietly penciled issue, as opposed to, there are very, very few issues in the Snyder Capullo Batman run that are not Capullo.
That's true.
And oftentimes when he did that, they were like special interjection issues in the first place. They weren't necessarily keyed into that actual run. I remember they did like issue 27 was like some kind of weird tie-in to the then upcoming Batman Eternal. It was like, here's a sneak peek at what's going on in that, and it just kind of dropped you in media res. I think that was Dustin Nguyen, I think, penciled that one.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a
Capullo didn't pencil any of the villain issues. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. I was going to say, yeah, and even when they did do a fill-in artist, it was typically either for just like you said, either an annual or a one-off, and when they did that, they typically had very high-level talent too, like a Jacques or I think Fabok did a couple, I want to say. Maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right. God, I love Fabok's work. He's one that would be really interesting to do a collision on, actually.
But anyway,
like Tony Daniel or Jim Lee, I think would be an interesting comparison on those. I almost feel like Capullo wins this in a walk, just because I feel like Capullo can hit a deadline in a way that Frank Quietly can't. If you want Frank Quietly on a deadline, you get Chris Burnham. If you want Greg Capullo on a deadline, you get Greg Capullo.
That's true, and I mean, we mentioned that, you have closing in on, if you include Metal and Last Night on Earth and stuff, you're closing on 70-some-odd issues, I want to say, of Batman, and you have 70-some-odd issues of Spawn he did back in the day, which were also him definitely making a name for himself, but still the quality was really consistent and there. The cover work, everything else, I do think if you're talking about long-term storytelling, I think you're right, you have to give it to Capullo for the simple fact of he has those 70-some-odd issue runs. He had those constant covers, those day in, day out.
Again, you had the Snyder Capullo Batman coming out every month, and every month there was arguably something in that book. There was some page in that book that made you go, wow. Now, and again, like I said, every time you got a quietly issue of New X-Men, every time you got a quietly issue of, I don't know, The Invisibles, whenever All-Star Superman, actually came out, you drool. Because the work is so clearly there. Every issue of We Three, I mean, that book will make you cry for 1,000 reasons, but one of the reasons is every page is just achingly beautiful. But to get that kind of he doesn't. That kind of consistency, he quietly needs more time. And admittedly, like I said, you don't get that with every page of a Capullo book all the time. I mean, arguably you do with Last Night on Earth. But, I mean, there is at least a page in 20 where you're like, wow, that's a fascinating choice. That's an interesting angle. That's a cool idea. Again, I feel like for long-form storytelling, I have to give it to Capullo. He's far too consistent for me to say anything else.
Yeah, and just looking at the actual numbers here. So from Batman, New 52 Batman, from issue 0 to 51, he literally only was not on issue 12, 18, 28, 34, 44, and 49.
And every single one of those was like an interim issue, which I think was given to him so that he could, catch up or do something special. Because 12 was the introduction of Bluebird, 28 was the Eternal issue, 44 was something in the middle of the Gordon Batman story that I can't remember, but there was some weird thing in there. So, dude.
Yeah, and then if you include Spawn, too, from issue 16 to basically 100, he either did a cover or the entire art for basically every other issue.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you're talking about long-term storytelling, that's that one and what we're about to get to they're very kind of one-sided in the sense of they're just the format they excelled at. So I think we will have to get to Capullo because it's just numbers alone and consistency. Like you said, you're missing 4 episodes of 51 or 4 issues of a 51 issue run, and then on top of that, like I said, that's not including Metal or Last Night on Earth or any of that other stuff. So you really have another 8 to 10 issues on top of that, plus covers and variants and everything else you want to include. So but
and I mean, I think Metal may have been the last issue was delayed by like 2 weeks, and that's nothing. Yeah. That's really nothing.
Not when you look at like All-Star Superman schedule.
Exactly. Yeah.
But speaking of All-Star Superman, the next category, number 2, best at miniseries or short-term series, and we're going to include 12 and below for this. So mini, max series, whatever you say, whatever's not ongoing that had a set number of beginning, middle, end. And I didn't do this on purpose, but I do feel like, for me personally, because of Frank Quitely, because Flex Mentallo is possibly my all-time favorite comic of all time, because All-Star Superman is my favorite Superman story, and I will always fight the best Superman story of all time. I mean, the man excels at mini series like that. We mentioned We Three, like that's kind of the master. He's the master of that domain, basically, in my opinion.
It's definitely where he excels and shines. It's the format he is built for. I agree. And again, for those of you who may be new to the podcast, who may be checking this out on YouTube or wherever because of the idea of the collision, like I said, Colby and I did a pretty in-depth review of Batman Last Night on Earth last week, which was a book that came out, I think, 2 weeks ago now at this point. And I mentioned in that review how I felt like Capullo, in that book in particular, really went out of his way to make every single page a work of art. He really he went into Last Night on Earth like he had something to prove. Yeah. And what's funny is he doesn't, but he attacked it like that anyway. And I really appreciate and admire that tenacity. But at this stage, I cannot award that tenacity when put up against the body of work that Quitely has put out in that same format. Again, you said it and I'll say it again, All-Star Superman.
Yeah.
Lush, lavish. There are things he does. I mean, there's some really beautiful stuff in the first issue where he goes out of his way to sell Clark Kent's posture and general conception of oafishness that a lot of artists don't really. It doesn't, nor does it need to necessarily occur to them.
Yeah.
But he does so many things with hunching Clark's shoulders and kind of pulling him over that sell this idea that he's a big galoot who doesn't know how to handle the size of his body. That is so fascinating on the page.
Oh, yeah.
One of my absolute. I'm so sorry?
Oh, no, yeah, I was just agreeing. Entirely. Like, to me, he defined that look of Superman like no one else, and he took away or Superman and Clark Kent, he took away the mystique he's one of the only people to really fully grasp the distinction of Clark Kent versus Superman artistically in a way that so few have.
Right. And I got to say, and I know this is scripted. I know this is something that Morrison would have put in the script, but Quietly is the one that put it on the page. The issue where Superman goes to see Lex Luthor in prison.
Yep.
There is an image that is forever burned into my mind. And there's a preface. The preface to it is when Lex looks at Clark Kent. He goes in there to interview him as Clark Kent. When Lex first looks at Clark Kent, he kind of analyzes his face and he says, "You do the Superman eyebrows." And Clark's like, "What?" And Lex says, "You shave your eyebrows into the S shape that he has." It's a very popular fashion trend. I've seen it everywhere. You do it too. That's so pathetic. And then at the end, when Lex has had an eyebrow burned off in some kind of accident, I can't remember what it is, he borrows a pencil and pencils in his eyebrow back in, and he has unconsciously penciled in a Superman eyebrow for himself. He's drawn it on, and he doesn't even realize he's done it. And it's again, that image of Lex is burned into my corneas as just a perfect picture and a perfect illustrated summation of this character. And again, I know it's in the script. I know that's not something that Quietly. I'm not saying that Quietly is too ignorant to put it in there on his own, but Grant Morrison is so meticulous. I know that would have been a scripted moment, but Quietly realizes it so perfectly that I can't give this award to anyone else with that level of. I mean, I can't remember the last time I read All-Star Superman, and I can recall that panel with perfect clarity.
Well, and
it's amazing.
And not only that, but one of my all-time favorites all time, the Superman helping the suicidal teen image, just him hugging her is such a powerful image that you get to see shared all over the place, even without the captions, because it gets across the message and it's everything and more. And I mean, as far as as much as I love Greg Capullo, talking about mini-series, max series and stuff, your only real competition, you're looking at stuff like Angela, which I love and adore, The Creech, Haunt, Reborn, a lot of stuff like that, which is all very fun stuff. But as far as, again, Quietly releasing what I think is his mini-series are some of the best comics ever made.
I think you just may have stumbled onto something that I hadn't really considered until this point. Quietly manages to sell tremendous emotional and character moments.
Yeah.
Capullo really excels and sells at really tremendous action moments or exciting moments or fascinating moments. And I think that may draw the difference, because when you're working on a monthly comic book, that's pulp. That's going back to the tradition of pulp. That's supposed to be eye-catching. That's supposed to have that cliffhanger that brings you back next week. Whereas when you're working on a miniseries, when you're working on a self-contained story that a miniseries presents, you're working with character and theme and idea on a level that most monthly comics aren't going to have an opportunity to explore as fully, because you've got to get the next issue out. You're continuing the legacy of this property. Now, I know there's some argument to be made that, of course, a lot of long-term form and long-form comics have managed to get across really fascinating ideas and theme. I mean, Saga of the Swamp Thing is one that comes easily to mind. What Al Ewing's doing on Immortal Hulk is very clearly something that's happening right now. But I feel like the reason people gravitate towards miniseries and especially miniseries about like origin stories or the end stories, the final stories, the Dark Knights, the Year Ones, the Born Agains, the
Last Night
Man Without Fears, Last Night on Earth. Yeah, is because there's more emotion, there's more character, there's more theme, there's something you can develop, because you have X amount of pages to tell a story. You know exactly the story you're going to tell. And I think Quietly really excels at the emotion of those moments in a way that Capullo is better suited to the bombastic pulpiness of a long form series. So I think that may be why it's so easy to point at Capullo and be like, this guy is the one of the preeminent long form storytellers of the 21st century, and quietly is the master of the shorter tale.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
No, I agree entirely. I think that's a good distinction, and actually I'm glad we did these first two, because I think that is an important distinction between the two that we'll definitely see pop up again and again. And I think we'll definitely give Frank Quietly this, because much like Capullo, I think it's the reverse is so true here, is that's where he excels at. That's his domain. That's what you mentioned. He does it like no one else, and that seems to be his expertise. So give that to Quietly, and we'll jump into round 3 now. We got 1-1 here, so we'll keep this.
That tends to be how it happens. I think it was a little bit almost more intentional this time, and I'm down with it. Because, like I said, we had to get the easy ones out of the way.
Yeah,
first.
We have to stuff like that, because I feel like it's important to set up that groundwork, because we'll keep coming back to that over and over again anyway. So it's nice to at least have that as a reference point, because we'll jump into now. And this is going to be a much harder one, because both of them, you could argue this is other things they excel at, which is round 3. Who is the better team player? And I mean, to me, this might be the hardest one on here, for the simple fact of when I think of great teams in comics, the top 2 I think of are Grant Morrison, Frank Quietly, and Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really hard point to argue, because you can tell that these paired creators love working with each other. That there's a reason they keep going back to each other. They keep finding each other. Snyder and Capullo have been very vocal about their friendship and how they've grown as creators together, and how much they enjoy working with each other. I feel like Quietly and Morrison are definitely more muted in that, but I think that may just be the British Scottish in them.
Yeah.
But I mean, they clearly love to collaborate, or else they wouldn't keep collaborating.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you could also throw, in fairness, you can also throw Capullo, McFarlane, or actually you could nowadays Quietly Millar. You could throw up there. He's worked with him on a ton of work now, so you could throw them up there. And I would definitely think those are also very. They've proved they both also work with other teams well, and they both have made some great work with them. But I think for this, we can clearly focus on these two, because as those two.
I almost want to go in the opposite direction. And be like, who works better outside of their comfort zone? Because there's clearly a comfort for Capullo and Snyder to work together. They have they've talked about that they have a shorthand now for each other. That Snyder feels like he doesn't have to do heavy panel descriptions, because Capullo intuits it. And I feel like you get the same thing from Morrison and Quietly. Again, we don't have as much of an insight into their process.
The really hard thing about this is if you take away the work they did with, and I think it's a good place to go. You take away the work they did with Capullo, you take away the work they did with Morrison, and you say that we'll just accept those are possibly number 1, number 2, possibly interchangeable on best. Honestly, some of the best. I mean, I would put them up there with some of the best teams of all time in comics, because especially at this point. But if you take away that, the interesting thing is that does take away so much of both their bibliographies, especially their heavier hitters. So that kind of that boils it more down. I mean, again, being really honest, that for Capullo, that boiled it down to a lot of like one shots and one offs stuff, like the Swamp Thing mini he did.
I was going to say he did the Swamp Thing with Azzarello.
The crease was so low.
If you take away that, you got who really has Quietly worked with outside of Morrison or Millar, though?
That's a good point, because the other stuff you have, like,
I'm really trying to think.
You have stuff like the Creech, but that was all him. Like, that was him writing. I think he did everything but letter.
Hunt was with Robert Kirkman,
and McFarlane though was involved.
Right, yeah, but McFarlane was like more supervising, I think.
But I think Capullo.
He did like the first 6 issues, right?
He did, but I think it was mostly like backgrounds and stuff like that.
Yeah,
because they had another artist on that too. Cause it was Kirkman, McFarlane, Capullo, and somebody else. I can't remember their name, and I feel bad about that. Yeah. But even on the other hand, if you go,
I feel like Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Looking over at Quietly, you have a similar issue where you do have stuff like he did the 2020 Visions with Jamie Delano, and that was a 3-issue mini.
Okay.
You have he did do the one story in Sandman Endless Nights with Gaiman.
Right, yes, yeah, which was wonderful. It was very, very good.
He did that's with Morrison, that's with Millar. Wow, it's really interesting if you take those out, because then you're going back to stuff like his Judge Dredd work and stuff like that. But it is weird. You talk about taking out their comfort zone. In that note, who's worked, I will say, I guess quietly because of the Delano series, because he worked with a couple. I think he did that. What was it? Wasn't there a Kingdom Come spinoff or something? He was involved. Let me look.
Oh yeah, he did. He did the Plastic Man's son. God, what is that
Offspring,
character's name?
The Kingdom Offspring.
Yeah, he did the Offspring one shot with. I believe it was Mark Waid wrote all the one shots, and that was really tremendous. And that was really I think that was one of his first big American works.
Yeah,
man. Because I was going to say it almost feels like you kind of have to give it to Capullo just because Capullo seems to put himself out there a little bit more. But, man.
That's a tough one because it does kind of come down to, do you go with Capullo for the simple fact of he's such a team player that he only will work with these people, basically? Or do you go quietly that he at least will open up to other teams? That's a tough one.
That was why I was reading Team Player as who's a better team player with the industry. And they're both pretty insular creators. And I'm not sure who I think is the slightly less insular.
I guess
they're also to bring it back to or not to bring it back to, but to bring up. They're also both intensely personal creators.
Yeah,
like I said, Frank Quietly's a pseudonym, and I don't know who knows. I mean, I'm sure Grant does, but I don't know who out there really truly knows his real name, and I'm sure it's not really been discussed. Capullo doesn't do sketches at conventions. Yeah. He doesn't draw in front of anybody. They're both intensely private people in their own way. So I think. With being within the comfort zone, being within the comfort of having a team or a creator, a co-creator that you really work with is heavily important to both men.
Yeah.
So, man, this is actually quite a stumper.
The one thing we can say, kind of going back to the first two, is Capullo has worked longer with his teams, at least, as far as in a format where both of his major contributions have been 50-plus issues.
But I feel like you can stack up all the miniseries that Quietly has done with Morrison. I mean, what artist's name do you associate with Grant Morrison first and foremost?
I mean, it's like Frank Quietly, but I mean,
it's Frank Quietly. It's not. Oh my God, who drew Kill Your Boyfriend?
Oh shit! I should know that.
You should know that because I can't, and you should.
I love that book. I don't have that in front of me either, but I know what you mean.
And that creator, Philip Bond.
Yes.
Philip Bond should be a name that you associate with Grant Morrison, but the first name that comes to mind when you think Morrison it's fucking Quietly. So,
and by the way, it's I don't know how accurate it is, but on Wikipedia, his birth name is Vincent Dehaan.
Okay.
So I don't know how accurate that is, but it is. Yeah.
I'll take that as fact, but that is definitely not something that that has a lot of traction. That's not something that a lot of people just know off the top of their head.
Yeah.
And again, Capullo doesn't draw in front of people, which, at least according to one person that works in my comics store, they find that rather suspicious. But I just take it on assumption that dude's intensely private and doesn't want to fucking draw in front of people.
Well,
I can understand that.
I think he looks at it, from what I've heard him in interviews, I think he looks at it a lot almost as like a musician or wrestler in the sense of that's kind of a little bit exposing the gimmick and a little bit showing too much in front of people, where you're not, if you do that, because I mean, there's a lot of people who, I think, going back to, I think Quietly similar, I'm pretty sure the very rare conventions he's done is strictly like a panel, basically. Mm-hmm. And I think that's about it. And I think that, but to me, I do think that is, I wouldn't say, I would definitely, I'm with you on, I wouldn't say special, I do think that's more of like, both of them, I think, because they are personal, because the art form means so much to them, I don't think they want to dilute it or make it feel like something less special. And I think that comes down to both of them in that same way of going back to the team player thing. I think that's why they are both so stringent on who they work with, because they want to make sure what they do matters for them, and I think that's why they both do keep coming back to it. I think, man, this is a harder one.
Is this going to be our first collision draw?
We've had
had a draw?
one. I think Watchmen had a. I think Alan Moore, Frank Miller had a. I think Watchmen, Dark Knight.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, because we could not. We couldn't delineate the bigger impact. I still say it's Watchmen, but
yeah.
We ultimately could not come to a consensus on bigger impact. So
yeah, that might be. I will say, because that is. It's hard.
It's a great question, but again, considering the body of work and considering the co-creators they have worked with, you can't really push it in one direction or the other. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made that Capullo sticks with his guys, but there's also the argument to be made that quietly has put himself out there. I don't think we can. I don't think it's fair to go in either direction. I think we need to. I think this is a draw, man.
I hate doing a draw, but at the same time, I can't come up with the better one because I think you're right. I think it's too close of a call on that, in the sense of no matter which way you swing it, there's a counter that to me makes as much sense. And yeah, I don't like doing that, but at the same time, I don't know what else to do because at the point it'll just be a superficial point of just whichever we want to pick. So yeah, we'll move on. That will be a draw. That's a very 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 rare draw. We will put that as a draw. So number.
Oh boy.
Round. So these next rounds mean a lot more now.
Especially when I already said round 4 is the one I'm looking forward to, because round 4 is going to be the fight.
Yeah, round 4 is interesting, which is biggest impact on major characters in the comics industry, and this is there's a few ways to look at this. Of course, the biggest fight is you literally have what we just talked about in the first round and second round. Arguably, the man who defined Superman for the past 20 years versus the man who defined Batman for the past 20 years, basically.
Or that past 10 years, I would.
Well, yeah, or at least who has the most identifiable Batman, Superman in recent history.
Yeah. And again, I think this really a big point of this is the argument is Spawn a major pop culture character?
Well, and
is what I really think it comes down to, because you do have quietly made a tremendous impact on X-Men. Quietly made the first change to the Beast to stick since the 1970s, which has since been retconned further by Brian Bendis in a way that I think was very cool and acknowledged the malleability of the character. But it had been a really long time since somebody acknowledged the malleability of the character, until Quietly came along and been like, no, he's going to look like this now. This is something that's going to happen. And unlike a lot of other changes, that a lot of other creators have tried with a lot of other characters, that was a change that stuck. Versus someone who, in Capullo, has a very definitive take on a character, but it's also a character who already has a arguably iconic look. Not arguably in the case of Batman, arguable in the case of Spawn, I think, because while Spawn has an iconic look, it's also not a look. I hate to go back to fucking Wizard magazine of all places, but there was actually a really good top 10 list in Wizard in like 1997 or something, where they were talking about the 10 best costumes in comics, and their qualifier for best costume in comics was, if you showed a picture of this person to a person who had never seen these comic characters before, which is of course impossible in this world with all the movies, but if you showed a picture of this person who had never been exposed to them and gave them a list of names, could they point to a picture and point to the name and be right? And like number 1 was Spider-Man, number 2 was Batman, because it's right there. I think number 3 was Superman, because literally those 3 characters, it's just like, holy shit, dude has a big S on his chest. Holy shit, dude has a big bat on his chest. Holy shit, dude has a spider on his chest and covered in webs. So Spawn, on the other hand, is like, he's got chains, he's got a cape thing going on, he's got the weird eye thing. What about that says Spawn? And I think that's a legitimate argument, but it's also, if you are versed in comics culture, that's a hell of a costume.
Yeah, and one thing we do have to include this, and it doesn't really fix anything, it goes both ways, is we do have characters like Spawn was just recently announced is going to be in Mortal Kombat 11. Flex Mentallo was just in an episode of Doom Patrol. Both have now are permeating into bigger culture, bigger pop culture in general. You, of course, have the Spawn movie, Spawn game, Spawn animated series.
Spawn movie might be well, the new one might be dead. And
new one, yeah, we don't know, but at least
a lot of people don't remember the Spawn movie.
Yeah, but the point being, they're both Flex Mentallo, Spawn are characters that have now are at least in the eye of the cultural zeitgeist. And for me, the only reason I am leaning towards Capullo, but the only reason I am is because there's a couple of reasons. One is I think he's given Batman now like three or four looks that have just become very iconic Batman images, from the just initial kind of very sleek redesign for New 52 to kind of the right before New 52 or right before Rebirth look. You have the Batman Who Laughs, which is now fucking popping up everywhere. Was
the Batman Who Laughs his?
Huh?
Was that not like a shock design that he then drew into the book?
No, that was Capullo.
That was a Capullo design. Yeah. Okay.
That was Capullo.
And I feel I'm so sorry. I hate to be an asshole. I have to point out the Batman Who Laughs design owes so much to Judge Death.
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of play. I don't know. It's just Judge Death. I mean, I see the resemblance.
The Dark Batman. I'm not saying they're ripoffs. I'm not saying they're knockoffs. I'm not even saying they're homages. The Dark Batman owe a lot to the Dark Judges. It's just true, man. You can't deny that.
I'm not necessarily denying it. I'm just saying I don't know how much that. I mean, I would love. They are similar. And that would be something I would definitely love if Capullo elaborated on. Cause I do think that's my point. Is a lot of I can't think off the top of my head, but there are other characters that have that very similar look of the gated front face, especially from the 70s and 80s.
With the spikes and that particular the wiriness, the leather. There's a lot of Judge Death in Batman Who Laughs.
Well, I really think it's a lot. I really think it's a lot more. And going on Capullo, I think it's a lot of Hellraiser and old Motorhead album covers,
which also have a lot of Judge Death in them because those.
Well,
Judge Death premiered in like 1979, 1980. I'd have to look it up to be sure, but it was he first showed up in the Case Files Volume 3, which would probably put it about 1979, I believe.
Yeah, I can't remember. All I know, I can't remember. Let me see if I can fact check this really quick of what Motorhead album cover, because I know that was one thing he was talking about. And also, I mean, we were also talking about metal in general, how well it sold and how many freaking statues are selling, pops are selling, things specifically from that series. I think is something to also keep in mind. Where I think Capullo, his redesign.
And again, I'm not trying to take away from Capullo. I'm just saying there is. And much like, if you want to, check off that gun, the new X-Men Beast was absolutely, he was like, no, there was a TV show called Beauty and the Beast. Ron Perlman dressed up like this. I'm going to have my Beast look like this. Yeah. I'm not saying
I'm not.
Frank quietly invents in a vacuum. I'm just influences are influences, and I feel like if we're going to talk about the inherent awesomeness of the design of the Batman Who Laughs, we have to acknowledge the Judge Death of it.
I mean, I will say there's similarities, but again, I don't know if that is actually. I don't know enough. I don't want to say that's 100% where it came from for him personally, because I think it's one of those things where it could be. It's a simple enough design where I think it could have come from multiple places, and that's. I just don't know. Like again, there hasn't been much said about it, and I definitely think it could be entirely that he loved that design and loved the look of it. Or it could have been inspired by something that was inspired by Judge Death, for all I know.
Which again, having just to go off on a complete tangent for just half a second, because we are blah blah, we have to do that. Of course. Brian Boland is a fantastic fucking candidate for a collision.
Yes.
Because and to tie that in, Brian Boland designed Judge Death. So for the first two major Judge Death stories were Brian Boland stories. So I literally just read them and reread them today, actually.
Oh.
So I very much have Judge Death on the brain right now.
My God, you're very prepared for that. So let's see, Motorhead. Yeah, it came out. It was see, this is gonna be a problem because 1977, so it's all very close to the same time.
Okay, that's fair. I figured it was the 1980 album, and I was like, they're probably influencing each other. But there's a chance Judge Death may have been influenced by that Motorhead album. So
yeah, we'll see. And again, it's a different enough one. Point being, tangent aside, Well, I think my biggest point with that is I think a lot of Capullo's design. Oh, and we haven't talked about Court of Owls and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay, and that's 100% fair. Who in recent memory has designed a memorable addition to the Bat villain family? We had the female ventriloquist, that went over kind of like a lead balloon. We had Professor Pig, which I actually think was a Frank Quitely design.
Yeah, I think
because that was
right.
in Batman and Robin. So, man, I just fucking checked myself because I was going to say Court of Owls is the first really big, genuine addition to the Batman mythos in a while, but we have Professor Pig from the other artist in this fucking collision. God damn it!
Again, I think that's why you have to kind of look a little bit at Batman Who Laughs, just for the simple fact I think you're right. I think especially and Batman Who Laughs is still fresh enough. It's kind of hard to tell where he'll be in 5 or 10 years. But as far as memorable,
you and I both argue that Batman Who Laughs is already overused.
I was saying
to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think he's being overused, but I also think, again, knowing the fact that he came out last year and I have a pop that I had to fight for on a shelf in front of me, I think it does say something to the character's staying power.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not saying he's a flash in the pan either. I'm just I remember when that issue of Justice League came out and the big reveal was that the hidden figure was the Batman Who Laughs. You and I were both like,
yeah.
Really? and of course it's gone on to mean so much more than what the initial thought was on it. But you and I were both we just kind of heaved a sigh and we're like, already.
Yeah, and then, but so you have that, and with Court of Owls, and one advantage I would say over Professor Pig is I do think Court of Owls is primed to be, like, I know they just had that Court of Owls book come out. The big rumors that is the new WB, I think Montreal game is going to be Batman Court of Owls. I think Professor Pig has been involved in more stuff, and he pops up here or there. But I think where he normally pops up,
I think it's easier to do a Professor Pig than a Court of Owls, and I think that's why. Because Professor Pig was almost immediately relegated to C-level.
Yeah.
This is the guy you punch before you get to the big bad status. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not shitting on Professor Pig. I actually really like Professor Pig. I think he's genuinely creepy, especially with the Dollotron gimmick. That's fucking weird and creepy. Yeah. But I think it's also a little bit easier to translate on something like Gotham as opposed to a Court of Owls.
Yeah. So I think that's my biggest argument. I do think Capullo has possible. I think that Quitely has redesigned and made some expert redesigns and done some incredible things, especially with Superman, with his X-Men work, with even what he did with Flex Metallo. But I think
also his work with the Invisibles, and again, we cannot discount We Three, even though it's a new property. It's not something based on a more traditional property.
Yeah.
And I think that may be, and I'm not saying this puts Quitely over the top, but I think the best thing that Quitely can bring to this is if we take it out of the realm of established characters like Batman to the Batman Who Laughs to New X-Men to Professor Pig. If we pull it out of that, the best thing that Capullo has brought to us is the Creech, whereas the best thing Quitely has brought us is outside of that realm is probably We Three, and there's no contest there.
No, yeah, I definitely agree with that. But again, knowing that
which is why I think Quitely's even in the running is for situations like that. Now, having said that, I do think Capullo takes this one in a squeaker, and I think you're right. I think it comes down to the 1-2 punch of Court of Owls, Batman Who Laughs. But I want you to say that Judge Death is kind of involved.
Oh no, again, I'm not saying there is similarity. I'm not disagreeing with that. They're definitely a similar type of character and similar looking character. I'm not saying that at all.
I just wanted to hear you say it.
I just knowing. From what I heard, everything about Metal, and from what he's talked about, I really do think I think Motorhead and Iron Maiden played a huge role in every design for those characters, and
absolutely.
But they're all British bands, so there is also a chance that they were themselves either influenced or dealt with Judge Death or the judges in general, or again, that's what I mean by it could be just a culmination of a lot of things.
Yeah, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, that time where it may have been steam engine time as far as weird, creepy versions of death in pop culture was going, and it may have just birthed these very similar creations that led to the creation of a the villain of 2018. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. I think Capullo takes this one in a squeaker, but I think quietly puts up a hell of a fight.
Oh, I agree. I don't think it's a close one. And here's the problem where looking at how this question is phrased for round 5, I think we just continue that same talk because 5 is biggest impact in comics culture. And I think literally everything we just said applies to that.
Yeah.
Again, like, so because then it does come down to, again, who, in comics culture in general.
Yeah, but the one thing I think, again, that maybe puts quietly on a slightly better footing if we're just talking about comic culture is the impact of Flex Mentallo over the impact of Capullo's work. The impact of We Three over the impact of Capullo's work. I almost think you can flip what we just talked about, and as far as just comics goes, I think the independent work may actually carry a little bit more weight than the yet another cool Batman villain, in a way that in question 4, the pop culture character side, the more traditional pop culture characters carry a little bit more weight. Does that make sense? Do you see where I'm coming from?
I can, because I do think his work on Invisibles and his work, and this is also the weird issue we're into, is it's just the time this is recorded in, is we are seeing people who have been influenced growing up, reading Invisibles, drawing stuff like Invisibles, like Flex Mentallo, and I think we had a bit more of the benefit of it because he was able to have a lot of his most iconic stuff happen in the 90s instead of a little bit later, where, like you said, even though Capullo had iconic...
Capullo was doing work in the 90s, but it was on Spawn.
Yeah, it was on Spawn.
Also, again, I don't feel like you have Capullo imitators, whereas... And again, I'm not saying this is a knock, but if you want a quietly on a monthly schedule, you get Chris Burnham, because Chris Burnham is doing his best goddamn Frank Quietly impression every single day of his life.
Well, I think you get... I think we will get... This is my point. I think in like 5 years, we're going to get a lot of people drawing Batman like Capullo. I think we'll get that very soon, but I do think because we have people growing up that, I think you have a lot of people who their styles are either similar or inspired by, and that is a very strong point there, because if you're talking about biggest impact in comics culture, I think Quietly had an impact. At least right now. Yeah. I think Quietly had an impact earlier in his career and earlier in his life than Capullo. So you definitely have a comics culture that's more, and we're also, going to include stuff like Multiversity, which you worked on. You include stuff like Batman and Robin. You include all of that, the covers, the one-shots. I do think comics culture in general, he probably has contributed more to the furthering of where we currently are. And I think, again, we're in a very weird spot right now, because if this was recorded even a year from now, it may change, because we're at a point where Capullo is just a powerhouse of putting out work after work after work after work, and Quietly is very quiet.
I don't know if you're saying if a year from now is fair. I think 10 years from now is going to be tremendous. I think if we were somehow able to revisit this battle in 10 years, I think this question could potentially have a vastly different outcome.
Oh, yeah.
Because Capullo's coming into his own, whereas Quietly, I mean, again, I hate to fucking bring up, of all things, Wizard Magazine. Frank Quietly was in their top 10 list at the same time Greg Capullo was at the time. So, I mean, they were both contemporary artists, but Quietly was, bulldozing Capullo when he was in his prime.
Well, I think there's stuff coming out now. Like last night, on Earth still had the potential. I mean, some of those Batman designs and we mentioned on our review, every panel, every page is so breathtaking that a book like this could go down to be one. I mean, we're early episode, issue 1 is just out, but
issue 1 is 2 weeks old, so we're still riding the high of an incredible first issue, and we've seen the high of an incredible first issue crash and burn in front of us.
Yeah, we have, but I even the one thing I will say art wise on this alone is like this has the potential at least to be these designs, these character work, everything has the potential to be that book that, like you said, a 15-year-old picks up right now and is so blown away by that they want to draw more serious, they want to keep going, much like people picking up Invisibles, where I think you're right, during that time period where Capullo's working on Spawn, because that was such a McFarlane character, and he was just adding to someone else's legacy instead of necessarily making his own.
Cementing his own, yeah.
I think that does take, not away from it, but it's just, he was building up at a different pace.
It changes the playing field for this question in a way I don't think we expected it to.
Yeah, and we have the problem that we run into is from about like there's a long period of, from like 99 to like 2005 where Capullo was basically doing a lot of album cover work and a lot of poster work and stuff like that. Where he
went off the map until New 52.
Pretty much, like he did Haunt and New 52, but there's a long period in between that and the end of his Spawn stuff where he was very quiet. There was books like The Creech came out like in 97 and the sequel came out in 2001, but those were both like 3 issues and didn't have a huge impact. They were just kind of there for the hardcore Capullo or Spawn fans.
Yeah.
Where quietly, again, that's where you have New X-Men. That's where you have a lot of his work continuing to go on.
All-Star Superman started, which took, half a decade to publish.
You have all these amazing titles from him, and I do think that is, you're right, what it'll come down to a lot. I think right now, as of June 2019, I think quietly probably does get this one because he has just, his legacy has been cemented for longer, so a lot of his fruits are coming into fruition and they're blooming a lot more than Capullo stuff right now, where Capullo stuff is most of the stuff that I think he will go down for being remembered for has all been in the past 7 years.
Yeah.
And that's weird to say for someone who's had such a long career before that and a very popular, very strong career, but this Batman run has just put him on such another level that
it really has, and it's so amazing. It's one of those overnight success stories that took 20 years to get there. It's so amazing to chart his career because he put in the work, he put in the work, and he just happened to get the right book at the right time with the right co-creator to explode in a way that quietly did as well, but he did it in the 1990s because Grant Morrison was around.
Yeah.
So you're right. This is such an interesting question because it's all about timing. But yeah, if we're gonna be fair and judge it off of right now, the world we live in at this moment, quietly takes this one, and that's a tied game, my friend.
That is a tied game. And I
keep trying to think of a quick tiebreaker question, and I can't think of anything that isn't just kind of a knee-jerk response. Like I was thinking, like, whose original artwork would you rather own? Pop off. And again, I think that might come down to I would probably take a Quietly X-Men page. You would absolutely take a Capullo Batman page. I know you would.
But Flex would be hard to turn. A Flex page would be hard. But
fuck, you're right. Yeah.
Well, Batman one. Yeah, that's such a personal taste one, and
exactly. That's what we try. We don't want to do.
Yeah.
With collisions, we want to try to stay away from personal taste and argue these creators' merits on their own merit, while also having a love and passion for these creators.
And we talked before, and we normally on these lists, if anyone's wondering, because for the previous one we've always done biggest impact on pop culture outside of comics, and for these we're not going to, for the simple fact of it doesn't for a lot of artists. It doesn't happen the same way as writers, or you do have a case like this where it's like, well, the only thing you point to, again, is Capullo spent like 6 years focusing on album covers and stuff like that, and we quietly just didn't, and you can't fault the guy for he just didn't go to this other branch of artwork.
Yeah, he did the artwork he wanted to do. Capullo did the artwork he wanted to do. Yeah. You can't punish either one for, personal career choices that they followed their passion.
Yeah, and then it becomes a weird thing of like, you can't be like, oh, well, Follow the Leader sold a ton of records, and he did the artwork for it, so that's clearly it. It's like, well, that's not. You can't just do. Yeah, you can't just be like, well, because then you're even talking about like, well, he didn't really. I mean, as much as the album work is incredible, he didn't really contribute necessarily to the album. So
exactly.
you get it. Whereas like when we talk about Alan Moore or Gerard Way or Grant Morrison and talk about their effect in pop culture, it's a much more 1-to-1 ratio of Alan Moore did this, or he wrote this, and that became a movie, and it was close to this, or Grant Morrison co-directed this show, or was the showrunner for Happy, or like it's a much normally.
Or The Invisibles is the reason the Matrix exists.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that.
There are arguments to be made. Yeah.
Frank Miller co-directed Sin City and directed The Spirit. Whether you like it or not, like they're a much easier avenue to go with a lot of writers for just how it is typically.
Tom King just got the new guys. I mean, it's still happening.
Yeah, no, it really. I mean, again, we have the Doom Patrol show. Although I will say, Gabriel Ball's or not the Umbrella Academy show. Gabriel Ball is very involved in that show, so that's kind of different scenario.
It's a first, is what it is.
Yeah, it really is. They've kept that very much between those two.
Diana Guerrero has talked about meeting Richard Case and being, Richard Case was on set and she was really, really happy to meet the guy who helped create Crazy Jane. She was super excited about that, but I don't think Richard Case is involved in Doom Patrol. I think he got a set visit and got to meet the stars, and that's about the long and short of it, which is cool. They didn't have to do that, and it's super cool that they did, but it's not, and again, I think Umbrella Academy is such an interesting case because that would be like it's the Happy case where Grant Morrison was pretty heavily involved in the production of Happy. Gabriel Ball is pretty heavily involved in the production of Umbrella Academy because again, self-contained stories that the creators can have a little bit more ownership over versus long-running corporate-owned characters who, regardless of whether or not you like it, the next issue is going to come out. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about Ryan North is ending his run on Squirrel Girl with issue 50, and it's sad because the dude turned a joke character into an Eisner Award-winning, pop culture phenomenon, and issue 51 is going to come out, or actually probably what's going to happen is in a couple of months, a new number one with a new creative team. But that character's going to keep going. Fucking Brian K. Vaughan on Runaways.
Yeah.
It took years to get Rainbow Rowell on Runaways and turn Runaways into a decent going concern again. But it's not like Marvel didn't fuck with the characters in the meantime because they're corporate characters. They're not creator owned in a way that, this has gone on such a fucking tangent. But going back to what we were talking about, it's so much easier for an artist like Gabriel Ba to have involvement in a project like Umbrella Academy because it is partially his.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have the rare exceptions of, well, even then it's kind of treated like a mini or like a limited run or a creator run because you do have like Doom Patrol stuff. But again, no, they're typically...
Or the Snyder Capullo Batman.
Yeah, again.
That's a self-contained 52 issue
or even,
arc.
Even when we're talking with Metal or Last Night on Earth or any of that kind of stuff, they're self-contained, they're very much of their own. Whereas so many stories like Jeff Johns' Justice League doesn't, even though it was self-contained, for some reason in my head that doesn't feel as self-contained.
It really doesn't. It's a fucking hodgepodge. And I own the first volume, I own Origin, and I own the Dark Side War. And fuck me if I can tell you what happened between those two volumes. Forever Evil's in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's true. Forever Evil's popped up in there at some point in time. The
Trinity War was terrible. I remember that.
There's Future... The other 52 issue Future End was like loosely tied away. But still, I mean, you have all the stuff that was spinning out. Like I said, spinning out or tied in. You had weird crossovers. You had some that worked. You had changing.
There was an Amazovirus thing that really didn't work at all, and that's how he got Lex Luthor to be a member of the Justice League for a while. And that story sucked.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of that stuff. So it is, again, I think that's why I've really come to appreciate so much what Snyder and Capullo have been able to do in the grand scheme of stuff. Because for so long we've heard about how, people just can't write stories like Chris Claremont. You can't have an X-Men run like that. Well, meanwhile, arguably, Snyder has kind of had a similar-esque run on Batman, at least, as far as time-wise.
Ryan North has on Squirrel Girl.
Yes, exactly.
If we're pointing shit out like that, you have to point to the 70 or so issues of contiguous Squirrel Girl, most of which was done with Erica Henderson. Yeah. She eventually left the book and was replaced by another fantastic artist whose name escapes me, who has really lived up to her legacy. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is doable. It's just easy to forget because you have these constant reboots and removes and changing and new number ones. I mean, Jason Aaron's been on Thor for fucking a decade now. Nobody remembers that because there's been 6 Thor number ones since he started.
Yeah, and that is the one thing I will give. The one thing that for all the faults DC has, especially when it comes to Snyder, when they realized something that it was working, they seem to have, with the exception of possibly Zero Year, they have not really shoved. It doesn't appear from anything we know to have shoved anything, or if they have shoved stuff, Snyder and Capullo have just been magicians at making it work.
Yeah, I feel like if we're gonna make that comparison, I feel like 0 Year was the Avengers: Age of Ultron of the Batman run, where it was like, we need you to do this. Okay. You did it. It's fine, but I don't know. Maybe go ahead and maybe get back to what you were doing.
Yeah, like I mean,
great, awesome, thank you.
In fairness, it's like it's weird, but it's like you look at something like 0 Year and you look at what they got to do with their end game or other stuff, and it's like, God, they definitely found a way to kind of make everything they wanted to do work in a way that is, I don't know how. I don't know if they were just if it was just because.
And as much as I dislike Endgame, that is 100% the story that Snyder and Capullo wanted to tell.
Like that.
I say that from having talked to Scott Snyder about Endgame, and he was very forthright. He was like, "Yeah, that was me working through some stuff. That was a very, very personal story to me." And I was like, "Good on you, man." I did not say didn't work for me, but you could tell there was true, genuine passion.
Oh yeah, someone who has the finale to Endgame signed by Capullo and Snyder, and who talked to them about like the passion they had for that is there, and like, going back to Squirrel Girl, Ryan North, and all the stuff, or anything quietly done. I think that's something that's important is when you have artists that remain on projects because there is a passion there, it really does show. That's why a book like Last Night feels so passionate, even though they're almost 10 years into this story that they've been telling, compared to, and I don't mean to do this, but like Bendis towards the end of his Marvel run, where some of those books started becoming very...
Actually, I will say Bendis, at the end of his Marvel run, picked it back up. Because that's when he re-picked up Alias. That's when he did that 10-issue Defenders series.
Oh, yeah.
He was really trying to do something on Iron Man. I don't think it quite clicked, but you could tell he was trying there. And even his X-Men run was pretty solid. But yeah, I would argue he was done with Avengers before Avengers was done with him.
Yeah.
And
I think Spider-Man is similar.
Yeah, I think so. And there was some stuff in between when he was kind of unceremoniously removed from X-Men because of Secret Wars, and heading into his final months at Marvel with Alias and with Defenders, that he was just like, he was clearly coasting. You're absolutely right.
And I think that it's something with these artists, even though, again, I hate to call it tie game, but at the same time, I think they have...
I think it's fair. I think after everything we've talked about...
I do too. I think it's a fair tie. I mean, it sounds like a weird way to start the new season off, start everything, but at the same time, I don't think there is a way, because you can't be like, you can't just be the flat out who's a better artist, because we talked at the beginning, they both, I cannot tell, I've never picked up a Capullo or Quietly book, and I truly mean this, and just been like, oh, this is shitty art, or man, that you can tell they're completely phoning it in here. Like,
yep.
I've never... And
I expected to say that with Jupiter's... Ascending or Jupiter Children, whatever Jupiter book he was doing.
Oh, Jupiter's Legacy.
Jupiter's Legacy, yes, thank you. Well, because I picked that up. I picked up the digital trade once, super cheap, and I was like, I was fully expecting it to be Quietly for the Paycheck, and like I said, I think it is Quietly for the Paycheck, and it's still, there's a couple of action sequences in there that are just as fucking jaw dropping as some of the sequences in We 3. Dude, neither of these dudes just show up for the paycheck in the way that we think.
Yeah, see, when we were saying, I was thinking if I could spin that going back to the best team player cast. So one person they've both worked with is Millar with Reborn and Jupiter's Legacy. But I do think they're about the same amount. Well, Legacy has another 2 volumes, but still, they're not too far off in issue numbers, and I think they both turned in great work with Miller. So I
need to read Reborn. I'm afraid I do not have an opinion on that. The only thing I've ever seen is the first cover of the first issue. I have yet to read it, so I cannot offer an opinion on that. But I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, no,
I know you read it and super dug it.
Yeah, no, I think they're both great, and I think, again, as weird as it might be, I think a tie for this one is totally fair, because I think that's the only real way to do it. Because without adding a question, that's either one that we are not good enough or qualified enough artists who tell about whose consistently line work is better or shit like that.
Or panel-to-panel storytelling. Because I try to talk about panel-to-panel flow, and I don't have a good enough reference on either artist to be able to say this works or this doesn't.
But I want to say...
I think they're both very good.
Yeah, they're both great. And because they also do stuff that they're some of the only artists I can think of that have had either silent issues or issues with little dialogue, but that you consistently follow the story. So I can't say that they're. I cannot say that.
Can I tell you my favorite thing about the quietly enough said issue of All New X-Men?
What's that?
Okay, so do you remember the Nuff Said month?
Yes, I do.
Okay, for listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, one of the early Bill Jemas, Joe Quesada experiments in their run as editor-in-chief and whatever the hell Bill Jemas was supposed to be, creative consultant or whatever the fuck he was, at Marvel, was to be like, we want to feature our artists. We're doing a month where there is no dialogue. We're just going to have the artists completely tell the story, and then we're going to publish the script in the back of the book so you can kind of compare and see. And there were some books that were absolute garbage. The Joe Casey Uncanny X-Men issue had a panel where Wolverine was very clearly screaming at somebody, but because the book had no dialogue, there was no dialogue, and you could tell Joe Casey didn't give a shit. Chris Claremont, Nuff Said issue, had so many goddamn sound effects, it may as well have been scripted. There were just words everywhere. But then you get to the new X-Men issue, and at the very first, there's a monitor that says, "Quiet, please," and it's Emma and Jean going into comatose Professor Xavier's head and learning the origin of Cassandra Nova. And the very last page is the splash page of Jean and Emma walking out of the area, and I can't remember what they said, but Grant Morrison, being Grant Morrison, of course, he's going to tell the story however the fuck he wants. He actually had Jean say something, and it felt like a fucking shout, because you'd gotten so absorbed in quietly storytelling with completely wordless. You got so absorbed in his story that when dialogue actually showed up, it caused me to start. It was like I had physically been slapped. It was a shock, and you know that was what Morrison was building towards and what Quietly was building towards, because you were so absorbed in this silent storytelling in a way that so many other artists that month just weren't able to pull off. They were interesting stories. I remember the Bendis Daredevil story, I think, had Alex Maleev art, and it was, of course, gorgeous and cool and very well done and neat. But nobody drew you in and made the silence a part of what was happening the way that Quietly did, so that when that silence was broken, it caused a physical effect, and that was fucking awesome.
Yeah, no, and I think back to that image, that issue stands in my head. That's that's one of my favorite issues of that run for that reason. And I think for Capullo, we talked about it before, personal versus action. I think going back to Endgame, that Endgame fight between Batman and Joker, like the actual fight. There may be words, but I don't remember the words, but I can very clearly picture the actual fight in my head.
That fight had amazing scene geography.
Yeah.
You knew exactly where everyone was. You knew exactly what was happening. The beautifully grotesque smile stabbed into Batman's back.
The cowl headbutt, like Spike going into him. There's so many moments there, like they're just visceral, and it feels like a big, honest, like it does.
And if there were words, they don't matter, because neither you nor I remember if there are any. But we have very, very clear. Again, it's almost like, I'll use the phrase again. It's almost like it's burned into your retinas.
Yeah. These
images that are just sitting with you and will sit with you for the rest of your fucking life.
Yeah, and I think that goes to how strong they both. We've talked about, but that's one thing both of these artists are so good at. Is there's very few artists that I can in my head picture my favorite pieces of work from them. And these are two people that I can picture several pieces from different books, different stories that I can instantly think about that go there. Whether it be the opening bomb sequence in Flex Mentala, whether it be that silent issue you was talking about, the Superman stopping the suicide, some amazing moments in We 3, whether it be the Batman in-game fight scene, whether it be even stuff from Last Night on Earth of him in the cowl jumpsuit.
See, for me, it's Alfred holding up the cowl jumpsuit.
Yeah, that's a great one. Or
it's a weirdly perfect.
Even like really weird specific stuff. I know that me and you both love stuff like Baby Darkseid.
Yeah, Baby Darkseid. I laughed so fucking hard, but I laughed because there was a weird joy to it.
There was such this real fun moment. The Metal #1, the cover for Metal #1 of the Batman in the pentagram with the two axes. So many.
Which I have a poster of on my wall.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Not gonna lie, I do.
I have several metal things. But there was a,
of course you do.
yeah, there was so many great, and that's actually one thing Lance got me at, I think Fanix, but I really appreciated was a big like promotional last night poster that I need to find a place to hang up. But they're both are so good at. To me, they're like a great musician, a great guitar player, a great drummer, or anything where they know how to do an image with the hook, but that does not take away from the story. It still tells the story. It tells everything perfect. It plays its part, but it also stands out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the collision. I don't think there's really much more we can say about this other than, dude, I'm going to be totally honest with you. This is the most fun I've had in ages.
I'm not going to lie. This has been a very, very, very fun collision, a very fun episode, and definitely is. This is the first one, especially since our Big 200, where I definitely had a ton of fun. I mean, I've had fun with the other, but this has been the most fun of like, oh, this feels special and feels different.
Yeah, it makes me excited. I want to do this again. This is, I miss doing this with you. It's because I don't remember when we did Morrison versus Moore, which was our again, that was our huge season 1 finale. But it's been at least a year because I was living in my old house when we did that one.
No, it's true, and we love doing it. So one thing, if you're out there listening and you like this, please like, share, all that stuff. It means a ton. But more than anything, leave a comment. Tell us who you think should have won. Tell us who you think won each round. But also, tell us who you would like to see us pit against each other. We would love to see us. We've done one fan collision episode before, and we would love to do one again. So please.
Absolutely. These are so much fun for us to do. We have, again, we always have some ideas, and we have some that are like kind of no-goes just because there's too much fandom involved. Like, honestly, if we're being completely fair, there's no way Gerard Way is ever going to show up in one of these.
Yeah,
it's not fair because Colby has too much of an adoration for him as a creator.
There will probably be a couple people that it will be impossible for me. Gerard Way, Max Bemis, Corey Taylor, a lot of people like that who have comics work will probably never pop up in this. Even, again, it's hard. It's hard because a lot of times it's the people that have small stories that mean a lot to us, but they don't have a huge bibliography. Like, oh my god, I just thought of the people who made. It's a story you love to death, and I can't believe I just forgot. It's one of your favorite comics. It's not Popcorn. It's not Popcorn. It's a
Box Office Poison.
Yes.
Yeah. Alex Robinson would be a really hard one for me to do. I was trying to think of some others. I don't think we'll ever do a Grant Morrison one again. I think we've definitively laid on the. There's no way that Grant Morrison is going to lose. So there's no point.
We pit him against Jack the only Kirby 2 people that
would be really hard for me to argue.
Yeah, no.
Against.
Yeah, Jack Kirby. Well, and a lot of people like that, they're so important to the history of comics that even finding someone who would be an opponent, but also finding just an equal level of passion would be hard. I think that's the biggest problem is because you're either going to get... We'd have to have people argue with that are as passionate about those people, but then it becomes more of a fight, and you don't want that either.
Exactly.
So
whereas something like this, I mean, yes, we did end up on a tie, which is a real rarity for us, but it was also we saw the merits of both creators and could argue the merits of both creators. So, neither one of us mentioned JLA Earth 2.
I was going to, but
which was Frank Wiley.
Yeah, no, I was going to mention that during the Best Short miniseries, but he has already had enough of that, and.
Oh yeah, he cleaned up that.
Yeah.
So, yes, please, just again, throw some suggestions at us. We want to hear what you want to to argue about. It's a blast. It's an absolute blasty blast.
It really is, and we would love to do these more often. And honestly, I think we can. It's just coming up with opponents that we're either passionate enough or knowledgeable enough to really do one about, but also that fit together. Because we can't just. We've had suggestions of people before, and we appreciate all suggestions, but there are ones that become like we can't do that because there are the ones that are just out of nowhere that we just either we don't care
generally don't know enough about.
Yeah, because I know there's been some good suggestions before that I've read. I'm just like I don't know, or I don't have personally enough invested in that. And
I was trying for years to get a Kevin Eastman, Peter Laird versus Dave Sim going, and that's never gonna happen.
Dave Sim fucked that one up mostly. Though we can't.
He did.
We can't blame anyone else but Dave Sim on that one. That was.
I I tried so hard, Dave Sim. Why did you do that to me?
Yeah.
Why did you have to be such a horrible asshole? I knew you were a horrible asshole, but then he had to take it to another level. Why do you keep escalating?
I don't know. He definitely goes above and beyond and just see every... It seems like, even if somebody doesn't know a ton about him, every 2 years, it seems like he does something that just blips the asshole radar.
Correct. Yeah, that's roughly correct.
Yeah, and it is sad for someone like him, because for someone who did mean a lot to comics at one point and who created such a impact back in the day, for him to keep literally every 2 years diminishing his legacy to the point where now, when he does have a controversy, the only people who talk about it are like people that were once hardcore fans, and that's about it.
Derek slowly raises his hand.
But if there's anyone else that's not super controversial like that, or one that we just don't care about, please, again, be on, like, whoever it is.
Just throw names at us, and if it sounds cool, we will definitely do it. We don't want to try to limit you, but if we don't do it, it's usually because, honestly, we're either too crazy passionate about it or just do not know enough about the creator.
That's true. Because I mean, we love comics, but comics is a massive world, and that's part of the fun of it. There's always people to discover. There's always people to go after. There's always new things to learn and new things to study. But there's also people that even that are massive people that one or both of us may just not be hugely knowledgeable of, because we only have so much time.
Yeah, exactly.
But seriously, thank you all for listening, and hopefully we get to do another one of these pretty soon, because it was definitely a ton of fun.
It was a blast. And having said all of that, again, if this is your first time checking out our show because you were interested in the title or the creators involved, welcome. We do this, like I said, a general comics and pop culture podcast, more or less every week, question mark?
Yeah, it's been crazy here lately, but I think we're getting back to a normal schedule.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. Fingers crossed. We are proud members of the Night Nerd Network, so you can find us on SoundCloud under the Night Nerd. You can find us on YouTube. We are starting a Night Nerd YouTube as of this episode. Hopefully, if that takes off, we can start uploading some back catalog stuff from other places, including your personal YouTube page, Doom Club. I want to go ahead and get a shout out for that here. You can talk to us on Facebook. You can find us facebook.com/blah-blah-podcast. You can talk to us individually on Twitter, where I am at BlahBlahPod.
I'm at HellhoundF5.
You can email us, blahblahpodcast@gmail.com, which I almost never check, and I'm sorry if you've emailed us and I haven't found it, but I haven't seen anything recently, but I will definitely be checking after this episode in case you want to hit us up with a longer missive there. And we're on Instagram, at Blah Blah Podcast, where you'll mostly just find stuff I've written. Again, if you haven't checked out the podcast before, I have published a novel. It is available on Amazon.com. I published extras from that on occasion. I've written some short stories. Colby is a fantastic musician and has music in various and sundry places you should check out as well.
Thank you. Yeah, there'll be more. I'm, as the ever weird person focused on finality, I'm always on to the next thing. So if you want some music, go check Doom Club, Spotify, SoundCloud, all the music places. I'm on there. More stuff coming. The stuff I'm more excited about. So, again, I just want to say thank you, because this was definitely a ton of fun. And thank you for listening. And seriously,
I can't believe it took us a year to get back to this.
I know. The more you guys share this, the more likely a new one is coming sooner than later. So please, if you like it, share, comment the hell out of it, and we will get on it ASAP. Again, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, and y'all have a wonderful evening.